two of the things that have been mentioned here, one is a list of LGBTQ friendly or ally businesses. That's something that the Gay and Lesbian Coalition of Central Massachusetts started doing in the early 1990s. So these efforts have happened before, right? And then in the early 2000s, there was an organization in Worcester called the Central Mass Business Council that was also interested in creating LGBTQ, almost a gayborhood on Water Street, and LGBTQ identified businesses and allies. So the thing is, these things have happened before, and they haven't been sustainable. And so one of the things we're really interested in tonight as a community is how do we have these initiatives be sustainable?
To start the night, if you have not seen the exhibit, we highly encourage you to see that. At the end of the exhibit, we end on a note that kind of analyzes the Human Rights Index score that Worcester recently received in 2018. So I'm going to read to you the score and what it's based on, and that is something that we're going to dissect tonight. So in 2018, the Human Rights Commission's Municipal Equality Index awarded the city of Worcester its highest ranking, 100 out of 100, as an inclusive and welcoming place for LGBTQ people. Although bestowed on the city, this achievement belongs to generations within Worcester's LGBTQ community who demanded equality, dignity, and respect. Remembering and honoring this struggle is essential, especially at our current moment when LGBTQ rights are increasingly under attack. Laws and policies alone cannot make Worcester a fully inclusive place. People make their community what it is. So I want to preface this conversation with the idea and the notion that it's not only about tolerance and acceptance, it's to the next step, which is equity. What does equity mean? And it's about equity across the board. So having said that, I want to thank our sponsor. So Mass Humanities is a wonderful sponsor for us. Mass Humanities is a state-based affiliate of the National Endowment of Humanities. I'm going to invite a representative to come and give us an overview of Mass Humanities, just so you guys know what they're up to and how they're supporting us.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here to welcome you to this event. And how great is it that Worcester has been given a perfect score by the Human Rights campaign for an LGBTQ plus inclusive city. And also, how great is it that all of you here today not only recognize that there's more work to do, but that you are here to contribute to what happens going forward. As David just said, we at Mass Humanities fund public humanities projects all over the state. That includes more than $250,000 in Worcester to organizations in Worcester in the last 5 years. And we are really thrilled to be supporting this project because we consider it to be a model. So much so that we awarded Bill Wallace, who's the executive director of the Worcester Historical Museum, he's somewhere here, we awarded him the Mass History Commendation this year in recognition of the amazing work done on this project by him, by his staff, and by partners like Stephanie Yuhl, who's the project scholar. And what I really love about this project, about the exhibit downstairs, about the different panel discussions that have been happening over the last few months, is that when the museum decided that it wanted to be able to tell the history of Worcester's LGBTQ plus communities, it reached out to those who participated in that history. And I'm guessing that that includes many of you in this room, reached out to collect documents, artifacts, and personal stories. And the message that it sent is that the Worcester Historical Museum will only tell the history of Worcester's queer community in partnership with members of that community. Gives you all ownership over your own histories, and I'm guessing helps to really strengthen those communities. We are living in a time when it is more vital than ever to make sure that the stories we tell about our past and our present include a broad range of voices, that they include a broad range of queer voices. This is an important mission of ours at Mass Humanities, and we are honored to be supporting the building of more inclusive histories, which is to say better and fuller histories, and of supporting the kinds of conversations that you're going to be having tonight about how to create an even more welcoming city in partnership with the LGBTQ plus communities in Worcester. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Turn the night over. I wanted to introduce Professor Stephanie Yuhl, our moderator and co-curator of the exhibit for tonight.
Before we get started, I thought that we would take a minute to let each individual panelist go ahead and introduce themselves, and then I'll say a few words about what our goals are for tonight and how we're going to move forward, and then we'll get started. So why don't we start with you? Aaron, go ahead.
Hello, friends. I am Aaron Richmond. I am the chairperson of the City of Worcester's Human Rights Commission. I've had that honor for the last 4 years. I've been a part of the commission for the last 5 years. I live here in the city for the last 17 years. My wife is a public law attorney downtown. My 3 kids go to school in and around the city. And I am very excited. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion that will ensue tonight. And just a quick footnote, I am here because of the what if, and I'll explain what I mean by that when I have a further opportunity a little bit later on. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm Corey Rincon, they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm the director of the state's Commission on LGBTQ Youth, which is a legislative commission. We were founded in 1992 by Governor Weld, and we work to support LGBTQ youth all across the state with work in schools, at the policy level, and with community engagement. So it's wonderful to be here. Thanks.
My name's Ed Augustus. I'm the city manager of Worcester. For those of you who aren't familiar with our form of government, we have a mayor who leads the city council, who's the chair of the city council and the school committee, and the city council hires a city manager who runs the day-to-day operations of the city, and that's me. I might mention that one other role I've had in my career was I was a member of the Massachusetts State Senate. I was elected in 2004. That may ring a bell. That was the year of the Goodrich decision. And one of the motivations for me running for the Massachusetts State Senate was because there was a huge debate, a huge war that was going on in Massachusetts about whether or not we should change the Constitution to add discrimination to a Constitution that was drafted by John Adams. And it was a critical, in my mind, a critical moment in civil rights history whether Massachusetts, which is the first state at the time to have gay marriage, would be able to keep it. Because if Massachusetts couldn't keep it, the prospects of Utah and Idaho and other states ever getting it were slim. And so that was one of the motivations for me running for the Massachusetts State Senate. I was fortunate enough to be elected and was one of the leaders of the effort to fight back the adding of discrimination to the Massachusetts Constitution. We ultimately won. Protected marriage equality here, and I think set the stage for universal marriage equality in the United States. So we're going to talk a lot about Worcester and the Human Rights Index, but I am proud of that particular part of my background. I want to share that. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. I'm Alexis Gorioron, and I come to you from Providence. And I am I work for the mayor's office in Providence as the liaison of the LGBTQ community. I am the head and chair of the Providence Tourism Council, past president of Rhode Island Pride, but still am involved with the production of Pride and co-founder of the Illuminated Parade. And I do a lot in terms of marketing, branding, and just community building in the city and in other parts of the country too, but throughout the city of Providence.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Cohen. I am a program officer at the Greater Worcester Community Foundation, involved in several areas of our work, including most of our discretionary granting, our work in the healthcare sector, and for the last 2+ years, being the staff person at the Foundation for the Creative Worcester Initiative, which includes many things, including the development of the Worcester Cultural Plan, that became a public document at the beginning of the summer, and that I know we'll be talking about a bit tonight as well. So, good to be here.
Great. Thank you so much. We see this as a chance to be constructive, to be creative, to voice concerns, to join toward action, right? So this is that idea of being really constructive, and I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful night, I think of it really as an invitation to all of us to be together and to learn from each other and to really try to envision a Worcester that enlivens that 100 ranking from the Human Rights Campaign. When we started doing this, or as we've done this research, we were really impressed by those numbers, right? In 2013, Worcester received a 55 on the same Municipal Equality Index. And so things have changed in the past 5 years, certainly around municipal laws and services and programming. But interestingly, as we were doing oral histories and working with our community advisory board and with members of the community, there was still a sense that while on paper that looked good, and while these protections are real, there was something, maybe multiple things, lacking in Worcester to really create an inclusive, welcoming, and thriving LGBTQ city. And that many people from the community go elsewhere for community and go elsewhere for entertainment. And we think that that's a lost opportunity. So that's how I see this tonight, for us to talk to each other, to listen a little bit on both sides, and then to really think about what next for the city of Worcester that we all are invested in. So with that in mind, I thought we'd get started by asking the Worcester folks where we sort of are, kind of to take the pulse of where you think that we are in terms of LGBTQ community here in Worcester, based on the different organizations that you represent. What kinds of initiatives do you have going? What might we not know about, and what's in the pipeline? So I don't know if you want to get us started. City Manager, would you like to do that?
Sure.
Thank you.
One of the important things, everybody has their role, and city government has a particular role. We can do certain things, but not everything. And one of the first things we tried to do, I became city manager in 2014, and I don't think John Throwbar is here. He's probably on the campaign trail, but he approached me and said, "Hey, do you know that Worcester only has a 55%? We should do something about that." And I said, "You're exactly right." And worked with Jana Turchuk with the Human Rights Office. And we said, what is it going to take for us to get this to where it should be, which is 100%? And we changed a number of policies. We changed our health insurance plan to make sure transgendered folks were fully covered, and all of the medical needs were fully covered for city employees. We added anti-discrimination language to anybody who's doing contracting with the city of Worcester. And we tried to put in place the policies that would make real who we think we are as a community. And that's reflected in the index. But it's not the whole story. There's a lot more to do. Some of it's symbolic, quite frankly. I was proud. I see Peter out there. For the first time ever, we put the pride flag over Union Station, probably the highest point in the downtown area, the most visible location in the city, municipally owned building. We thought that was a powerful symbol to say how far things have come. And we certainly do the pride flag every year in front of City Hall, the seat of government. We're proud and excited to host a growing pride event every year on the Common in the center of our city, which again is, I think, a powerful symbol of the inclusiveness and the welcomeness of city government toward the LGBTQ population. I think, there's a lot of other work to be done, quite frankly, in terms of especially our young people. I see folks from Safe Homes here who do a great job working with people who are not always welcomed, in their own families, and sometimes in their schools, and then sometimes in their neighborhoods. And so I think we have a lot more work to do as a community to educate each other and to create safe spaces and make sure that we're speaking with one voice about the fact that we embrace everybody for whoever they are, whatever gifts and talents they have to bring. Worcester is a place that you can be safe, that you can share those gifts and talents, and you can call home. So that's something we have to keep working on constantly. People in official positions need to make sure we're constantly saying that, but we all have a role in that. We all have a responsibility in that. That's not just, hey, tell City Hall to do that. That's something we have to do in our civic organizations, our religious congregations, our neighborhood meetings, our work environments, in all of the places that we interact. So we're all kind of responsible.
That's a great invitation to the community when we get to the Q&A tonight to be part of that conversation and to bring the concerns forward Can I ask you a question, Jonathan, about the cultural plan, of which you're the co-chair? Many folks in the community noticed in the cultural plan, I don't know if you've seen it, it's this document that came out in the early summer, that one of the earliest, the first images in this plan is an image of two people with the rainbow flag, Puerto Rican flag over their shoulders, really up front and center in that cultural plan. And yet there was some concern raised that nowhere in the document is there anything explicit around LGBTQ plus communities, rather that identity and community is folded in under the language of diversity in a very sort of general, and some people have argued kind of vague way. And so I'm wondering, in your conversations with the cultural plan folks, what do you see? What have some of those conversations been about LGBTQ communities in Worcester, and what do you see going forward happening?
That's a lot of questions to remember. I'll do the best I can. And I do want to open by saying I've lived in Worcester for a little over 5 years, and I moved here from Jackson, Mississippi. And so from somebody from the South coming up here, wow, Worcester is terrific in so many ways, and I'm incredibly impressed, and through my work engaging with so many organizations, moved by the richness of diversity in this community in so many ways. So, going to the plan. So I want to hit on the picture second because I want to talk about the language first, if that's okay. Because there was an intentional choice to not start listing every self-identifying or individuated group in Worcester. I think we made that choice mainly because we were going to leave somebody out if we tried to make a list. This is a incredibly diverse community. To hear, maybe 100 different languages spoken in the schools. In our work in the nonprofit sector, it's almost like we keep discovering new subgroups of people who self-identify in a particular way. And so we made a conscious linguistic choice not to really, I'd probably generalize the language, maybe, perhaps even a little bit too much, but to try and do that in a way that hopefully everyone would see themselves in the plan, or at least no one would say, well, I was intentionally left out of the plan. And that was a strategic active choice in the development process. I will note, however, that we do make distinctions about age groups. That was the only real exception, is that there's specific references to seniors. The youth section of the plan breaks down, talks about early childhood, talks about school age, talks about teenagers, talks about college students, because youth tend to get lumped, and their needs are different, and their family needs are different as well. So that's the only exception. And by the way, I do have the last 3 current copies of the plan with me, but they're at the printer. We'll have another few hundred, hopefully really soon. So on to the photos. So while we made this choice not to single out anybody linguistically, from a design standpoint, we tried to choose a broad selection of photos that said something about Worcester, that told a story about Worcester. It was just, it's just a line of photos in the bottom of the plan. In many ways, it may not even, I think we were very active and intentional, and certainly weren't looking to offend. Rather, we were looking to portray in 20, 25 photos a richness of diversity and difference and creativity that spans the city. So
can I follow up with
yes,
you on that?
please.
So in your conversations in committee, have you had intentional conversations about the role of existing LGBTQ organizations in the Becoming Worcester plan in some of these initiatives?
In the planning, in the 6-month-long planning process, yes, the LGBTQ plus community was brought up in some of those focus groups and those conversations, but equally to a whole bunch of other communities that were brought up. So there wasn't a specialized conversation about the community. Right. And we are very early in the implementation and rollout work right now. So.
Are there any specific rollouts that pertain to the LGBTQ community that have been talked about or that you're able to share tonight in relation to the cultural plan?
That are specific? No.
Okay, thank you. So Aaron, can I ask you a quick question too? So in your role as chair of the Human Rights Commission, where do you think we currently stand on LGBTQ centrality to the work that your commission's doing? And if you want to talk a little bit about what you have done in the past? I know you've been on the commission now for 5 years, and you've been chair of it for 4, correct? In what ways have LGBTQ concerns been part of that work, and what do you see moving forward?
So I'll start with the last question because I think it's the most important one and it's why I'm here. What do I see moving forward is it's the reason that I have my notebook and my pen and the primary reason that I'm here. We plan our work every year. Things, of course, come up throughout the year that we add to the work that we're attempting to do. But the really short answer is I'm not entirely certain. And I'd like to be more sure. And so when I mentioned the what if earlier, the what if in my mind pertains to what if I hear something tonight that we can help with? What if I hear something tonight that we can investigate, that we can study as a commission, that we can make recommendations to the city manager's office, that we can help somehow? And I don't know that that will be the case, but I'm hopeful that it will be, and it's why I'm here. So that's the what if. Over the last few years, a couple of the notable events that I can recall that may be of interest to you. We had, probably many of you know Dale. Dale came and spoke to us about this whole just ugly idea of conversion therapy and the idea that why not have explicit language to ban it, just in case, because there certainly are people in plenty of places that think it's fine and acceptable. And why don't we go on record, why don't we learn about it, understand it, and go on record, which we did, in support of a ban on conversion therapy. So that was something very recently, maybe it was a year or 2 years ago, probably also about 2 years ago, we had for a number of years been looking to imitate, if you will, or we just thought it made sense, something that Cambridge did. And we're often looking to Cambridge for things that they do that we think could be useful here in Worcester. This particular item was a shelter survey, so transient housing shelter survey around transgender rights, around policies, around education, around just knowing the laws. What does HUD say? What are your obligations? Training, lack of training. So we put together a survey. This took us some time, but we put together a survey specific to Worcester, and we implemented it as broadly as we could in every facility that there was a chance that they might have a transgender guest resident. And we, as a result, I definitely recall working with Laura Farnsworth afterwards and some others to put some training together around the results that we found. And it was voluntary so it wasn't 100%, I will say that. But a number of these places, even places like Veterans Inc. comes to mind, was one that I distinctly recall, would come in and say, we need to know more after they realized that there was so much they didn't know. Okay, but so what I would hope for is, as a result of tonight, that I'll have some concrete ideas that we can talk about, but I also want to invite all of you, any of you. I don't know that you could all fit in one time, but we have our Human Rights Commission meetings every first Monday of the month, with the exception of holidays and so forth. But otherwise, we do, and they're up on the 3rd floor in City Hall in the Esther Howland Chamber. This coming Monday is our next one, 6 o'clock, 6 to 8. And I would welcome all of you. So I'm hopeful that I'll glean something really useful tonight, but I would invite you to please come and speak with us so that we can really have a conversation about what you think we could be focused on in an effort to help this conversation. Thank you.
Can I follow up on something you said? So doing the research is great and the training for different shelters in the city. Has the commission thought about making a recommendation to have a shelter specifically organized and designed around transgender residents?
No.
Is that something that you think is worth considering, or?
I think that any suggestion that anyone makes, and you asked me that this afternoon, and it was the first time that someone had specifically asked me that question, and why wouldn't we talk about it? So no, we haven't, but why wouldn't we? If a need exists and there's a disproportionately affected population that could benefit from some additional policies. We do have, as a commission, we have the ear of the city manager, which we're grateful for, and we have community partners that we work with that come and talk to us about various matters. So there might be areas that we could help indirectly, perhaps beyond what we can do ourselves as a commission. Maybe this is one, but it's not something that we've had brought up before. It's not something we've talked about.
Thank you. So I'd like to turn to Alexis and Corey. So Corey, you do work at the state level. And so here we are thinking about Worcester, thinking about how to enliven and the inclusion feel for Worcester around LGBTQ communities. What is it that you're seeing at the state level? And you go to a lot of different communities across the state. What are you seeing that's working at the state level that you think we might want to consider? What are some of the challenges? You know, because part of the thing here is to learn, right? To learn from each other's experiences. So we were really excited that Corey and Alexis could join us, because we don't just want this to be a Worcester conversation, because these are interconnected lives, right? Interconnected communities. So we'd really love to hear from you about your experiences and suggestions.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like there's so much I could talk about because I think all of the issues that we're working on as a commission, are certainly applying to Worcester. And I think, as you brought up earlier, there are some of the recommendations that we issue are specific to the state government. They're kind of things that are in the state domain. But even a lot of things that we touch on, like juvenile justice, of course, the city's not setting the laws around that, but the city does have a lot of influence in how the laws are enforced and making sure that, for example, police are trained in LGBTQ competency. So I think that there's, a lot of interaction between what we're recommending at the state level and what's happening. A big part of what we do is work in schools. So we do trainings around the state in schools. We support student GSAs. We have a leadership network that we manage, which is all kind of evidence-based around the idea that there's been a lot of research done here in Massachusetts that students who are just in a GSA in their school don't necessarily benefit much, but students who are empowered to take on an advocacy and a leadership role really are. So that's a big part of what we do in schools. We've definitely had some participation from here in Worcester in that work. We've had, we were just looking through our numbers, and I'm not 100% certain of these, but what we have down is that while we didn't do any trainings in 2017-2018 school year, that in the past school year we had 4 trainings that were requested of us to come into Worcester and do. And the majority of those were for PE and health teachers, which is great, because a big thing that we're working on and that we're really interested in is health education, and especially sexual health education, because we see such big disparities in the health of LGBTQ youth. I wrote down in my notes a lot of facts and figures that I could go into, but I don't want to take up the full hour myself, so I won't do that. But we really, I think that's an example of kind of the opposite, where things happen at the state level, and that's great, but we really need action at the local level. So a lot of what we're doing around sex ed, we're working with the Department of Ed to update their health framework, which hasn't been done in 20 years. So that's a little overdue. And they're working really hard on making that super inclusive, but it's optional. So it's up to the folks at the local level to decide whether they want to take up that inclusive modern health education or not. And similarly with the Healthy Youth Act, that's in the legislature that we've been talking to the legislature about, that's also optional. It provides some frameworks for schools that choose to teach sexual health education, but it doesn't require it. So I think that a lot of what we're seeing, in that realm in particular around curriculum, there's so much that's left up to the local schools and the local school districts to decide. Another example is we came up with LGBTQ inclusive lessons. And that's also something that's totally left up to the individual schools to decide whether or not they want to do that. So I think that there's a lot of action happening right now around the state on the inclusiveness of our classrooms, especially on health, but really on everything. And because of the way that our state is set up and the amount of power that local folks have over education, that can be really good. It can also mean that it's harder to push things along at the state level, and we really rely on local partners to get that done.
Do you foresee any movement toward making these inclusive initiatives non-voluntary at the local level, but rather statewide frameworks? Because we in Worcester have had some conversations in the past year, or really heated conversations around the sex ed curriculum and which curriculum to adopt, and they got very heated. And so I'm wondering, from the state level, are there conversations along the lines of saying every student in a Massachusetts public school needs to be educated around these issues, not on a voluntary basis, but on a normative basis, on a sense that this is what everyone needs to know to be healthy?
Yeah, I can say that the commission has definitely recommended that, and I can also say that it's not likely. So I think, unfortunately, the reality is that if folks in Worcester want to have good health education, then that's something that Worcester has to do on its own.
Okay, thank you. Hear that, Worcester? So, Alexis, can we turn it to you for a minute?
Sure.
And let's talk a little bit about your experience of successes and challenges in making Providence a place that many people in the Worcester LGBT community go to.
Yeah, and Providence, has been on a long-term track here. I mean, it is committed to inclusivity and being a welcoming city, but it's an ongoing project. I mean, it's you have to be working on it every day, and there are times that you're going to stumble and you're going to fail and you're going to have those uncomfortable conversations. And quite honestly, it's okay, because that's when you really kind of get to the root of it. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to highlight, because my experience is in the nonprofit sector, the private sector, and the public sector. And it is the melding of all of that, quite honestly, that has contributed to the success of Providence. But it's not perfect. And we had done I sat on the board for a group called Equity Action, and we had done a year-long in-depth survey of our community, but it was focus groups, it was online surveys, it was charrettes, it was a whole series of in-depth research that literally took a year to uncover, to really get a pulse of the community and reaching those minority groups or people that don't have a voice, people of color, trans folks, everything. I mean, it was not hard. It was hard. It was very hard to do, and that's why it took a year to do it, but to really assess what are the needs of the community. And once we were able to do that, then we were able to kind of look at, all right, are the policies in place on the city and state level, on the government-wise, to implement some of these things? And then what can we do to engage community organizations and make sure that we are running all these policies by these groups to make sure it is representing what the community needs? And all this has taken place well over a 10-year span to get us where we are today. So it is a long path, but a really important one, and it doesn't stop. Like, we're at this point talking about the need to do a new assessment of the community because it has changed. I mean, that was 10 years ago. So think about how our community has changed at this point. And we struggle with issues with our police department. I was there as part of the liaison there, assisting with the training of our law enforcement agency in Providence and sensitivity training on there. But that training changes. And so, that's just an important thing to kind of realize, that assessment need, and then looking at what your community needs and making sure that everyone has a voice at the table. But from there, we've taken it, my role has really been more on the building community. And we do that in many different ways. And we're very fortunate that we have a mayor in Providence that has really melded the LGBTQ community into everything. So we have I was talking earlier about a master art plan that we have in the city about the building of different sculptures and inclusion of artists in the city. And it's just a natural fit. It's of just the LGBTQ community included in all of that. And, we're dubbed as the creative capital. And throughout that, it is the whole community is interwoven through there. I mean, we have our rainbow flags up in the city all year round, not just in the month of Pride. It's and the way I look at it, it starts from the top up. So it's kind of almost an inside-out approach. The mayor has to be really kind of shouting it from the mountaintops on there to make sure that everyone within their administration and then with all the city departments truly embrace that culture, because it is a culture shift, and it's taken a while for us in Providence to change that culture, and we're constantly needing to educate everyone about it. But then we've taken that and have created community events. And it's not only just Pride events. Obviously, our Pride is amazing, and I'm obviously biased. But building community events throughout the year that bring different people to the table. And so that has allowed us to kind of really shine in terms of inclusivity and being a welcoming city, because it's just ingrained now in the culture and the programming that we're doing. So that's just kind of a little different perspective, but we've done it through that. And then I'll just add one last thing on that, and that's on the tourism hat, because I'm the head of the Providence Tourism Council. Because businesses and organizations have seen the economic impact that our community can have, and also bringing people from outside the area into your city. So it's not just residents of the Worcester area, but really inviting other people from the region or the country to come experience the rich history and culture that you guys have here. And that's where we've kind of hung our hat on the tourism end of things. And then that has had a trickle effect, because through the program events, we're selling out hotel rooms, we're filling restaurants, and so businesses are taking notice. And so it just kind of grows and grows and grows from there. But it is a process. It takes time, and you have to build it slowly and kind of build that awareness. And so, that's something that you have such great history here, and such a rich community that you can really push that tourism part of it and that community building that I think will empower everyone and build a sense of pride in the city, pun intended.
So let me follow up with you on something. So you are the dedicated LGBTQ liaison for the...
So past. Yes, there's someone else in that position now, but
liaisons
previously.
For other demographics in the city, or just...
So back when I was the liaison, there was. As of right now, there is not, but there were. And I'm also of Cuban descent too, so I was kind of filling a couple of different roles there. Being bicultural and speaking Spanish, and also as a gay man, I kind of filled a couple of different roles in the administration. But that was kind of a heated discussion of the need of, do we need a liaison for all the different communities? And I think that some could just say yes, some could say no, but the point is to make sure that everyone has a voice at the table. So whatever that takes to have a voice at that table, whether it's a liaison, whether it's a community advisory board, whatever that may be, you need to kind of look at what makes sense for your community, because the liaison isn't always necessarily the perfect answer, but it's one that can be that conduit to the community that can help kind of gear some of those conversations that need to happen inside the administration.
All right, thank you for that. So City Manager, can I follow up then with you for a clarification question? So currently, we recently, we have someone that is named an LGBTQ liaison in the city government, but they also are part of the Human Rights Office, I think. Can you explain, so it's not necessarily a person, a dedicated individual, but rather part of a larger office. Can you explain that vision and what you're thinking around, do we pull out specific liaisons, or do you want to keep it within the office?
Well, there's a liaison in the police department who has done great work in reaching out and engaging with the community, and there was a liaison in the city manager's office, and it was Jana Turchak when she reported directly to me. We've reorganized a bit. So I'm probably going to appoint Suja, who's our chief diversity officer, who works directly for me, to be the liaison, just so there's somebody reporting directly the chief executive officer of the city, and making sure that kind of line of communication is open.
Because I think one of the really key things that you said, Alexis, is, and we'll get back to this at the end of the night, is this idea of people having a seat at the table from the inception, right? And not just from the sort of implementation or receiving end of things, but rather on the sort of visioning end to inform the process organically from the beginning, that's really ideal. Well, I thank you all for your comments. I think I want to pause for a second and open it up to the community, because I know there are a lot of people here who are really excited that you're here and want to ask questions and want to raise some concerns. And I think that this is a good time to do that. I would ask people to come to the center mic here in the center aisle and to introduce themselves and then to ask a question. So does anyone have anything that they'd like to get us started in a conversation, it's a great opportunity. Look at these influential, powerful, wise, involved people here that you have their ear.
Thank you. My name is Damien Montoya. I work at UMass Medical School. I'm a transgender male, and I just won Mr. Worcester Pride, so I'm really happy to be here and representing. Thank you. So, at least amongst trans and gender nonconforming people, it's been pretty well known that the hospitals in Worcester are not very welcoming to those kinds of people and not very well trained in our healthcare and needs. Is there anything being done to address that? Any kind of training that's been given to providers, or I don't know, is there any discussion on that? Because I know it's a pretty big topic in our community, and I just read an article actually in the Telegram and Gazette where they interviewed a gender nonconforming person, and they explained this really terrible experience they had with a provider. And it's just, I hear this all the time, and I've seen it for myself. I'm just wondering if there's anything being done to address that.
Thank you, Damien.
I'll be honest with you, this is the first I'm hearing of it, so I'm going to suggest to Aaron, this is a perfect
taking notes.
conversation for the Human Rights Commission to look more into and talk to maybe Dr. Castile, who's the Commissioner of Health and Human Services, to join that conversation and see what the specific issues are and what things we can be doing to bring people from the provider community together, maybe with the trans community, and talking about how to improve some of those services. So.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll add to that, actually. One of the things that we were just kind of talking about is, yes, you want to find resources within the community, but don't be afraid to reach outside, outside of your borders, even outside of the country. I mean, you have right in Boston, Fenway Community Health Center, which is a great resource. In Rhode Island, you have a group called Thunder Mist, and Thunder specializes on transgender health resources. But there's so many others on a national basis that you can learn from and get resources from. So just something to keep in mind.
Just wanted to add to that I have done some trainings for UMass, several of them, and has some colleagues as well. Unfortunately, none of our recommendations have been implemented.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Why do you think that is?
I think
what needs to happen for them to be implemented?
I think there is a new curricula that's been adopted that they're slowly starting to follow. I do believe that. I couldn't speak to what the name of it is, but I think it's difficult. And I think if you have one department that does start to implement some things, it's only as good as that one department unless it goes through the whole facility. So, for instance, just registration forms and boxes and doctors communicating, so people who go to seek health care do not have to out themselves 5 or 6 times in one visit. Yeah, that's
Thank you.
Bare basic.
Right, but really important, but very, very important. Jeffrey?
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Wright. I work at UMass Medical School, and I'm also the vice chair for the State Commission on LGBTQ Youth. Corey is also the director for. My question is to the city manager. So earlier on, you spoke about the LGBTQ liaison that's designated for your office, which is Jana Turchek. And my question is, I want to know, is Jana, is any portion of her work designated to LGBTQ work per se issues, outreach? Is she doing outreach, or is she just in the position just to answer questions when they arises? Because I have designated, since last week, I've been walking through the city asking city employees if they know who the LGBTQ liaison is for the city, and no one knows. Even city employees don't know who this liaison is.
She's the designated liaison, not necessarily just to city employees, to the community at large. When we first put her in that role, the logic was she was the one who spearheaded the effort at upgrading the human rights score and doing all the work with the different departments. She's not necessarily the community liaison, although being the human rights director, she tends to play that role with the community. It's a logical door to knock on. My hope is that there are many doors to knock on in the city, including my door, as evidenced by how this whole effort at improving the score started, with somebody from the community coming directly to me, and then us moving that forward. I do think that for purposes of city employees, the idea of having the chief diversity officer play that role makes some sense. And we were all here just a month or so ago. We've created new affinity groups within the city for city employees to connect with each other. And we did our first event for the LGBTQ affinity group here, seeing the exhibit, having a reception here, and connecting with each other. So that's one of our efforts, as well as having employees who may work in different buildings, different shifts, given all of the different departments, some of which are 24 hours a day. They don't get a chance to find each other and find common ground and connect with each other and talk through issues that they may not want to always share with administration, but want to talk peer-to-peer. So we've tried to create those opportunities as well for city employees.
And so I don't think my question was answered, but what I really need to know is she in the position just to answer questions when they arise, or is she doing outreach for the LGBTQ community?
I'm so sorry. Here I am again. Jana has reached out to me and asked me to train the Worcester Police Department. She also, with myself and a few other legal professionals, we trained all of Worcester City's homeless shelters under Jana's recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
And while we're waiting for the next question, can I ask you a quick follow-up as well around the question about treatment in hospitals? What kind of leverage does the city have, or maybe the question is relationship, does the city have with hospital leadership to really communicate these kinds of concerns and push for more equitable, just treatment or training programs so that the experience is dignified and equitable?
I think the city has a convening, ability. The idea to ask the CEOs of the hospitals to come in and talk to me about some of the things I'm hearing about members of our community and some of the challenges that they're having, and some of the recommendations and changes that we would be looking for. In a role like this, we have a lot of interactions with everybody in the community, from college presidents to business leaders. Everybody needs a street fixed, they need a sewer fixed, they need a police response to something. So the city tends to interface with almost everybody who's here in one way or another. And that gives us the ability to call folks in when we need to talk to them about something that's of concern. And I certainly am happy to play that role in this particular case. Just hearing about it, I want to hear more details. But I have no problem calling the CEO from St. Vincent and UMass to come in and chat with us about it. And in fairness to them, I have no doubt they'll come in and talk to us about it and see if we can get some movement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
UMass is state, so I think this can be a state issue.
As well with
So
Corey?
I think that's a route to go. Do
you want to say something?
This is where they're state.
Correct.
So
Thank you. Corey, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would say that, in the work that we've done at the state with respect to provider trainings, we often get, the response that there's not really kind of one person or office or agency that's in charge of it. And so we're kind of relying on everyone to do their part and push them along in the right direction. I would say for employees of the state, the commission has been working with the Executive Office of Health and Human Services to develop a training curricula to at least ensure some basic competency. And we're hoping that maybe as soon as this month we may get final approval on that and begin to roll that out across the state.
Hi, my name is Emily Krim. I'm an attorney here working primarily out of Worcester. Side note, I'm from Dallas, Texas, so I'm also from the South, and since moving up here to Massachusetts, I continue to be mesmerized by the rich history and also just the celebration of it, so it's exciting to be here. But so I'm an attorney at Myrick O'Connell, which is a law firm primarily based in Worcester. And I am curious to see your thoughts on where you think lawyers can be reaching out to the community, either just to do pro bono services, good places to reach out to start to offer services, to let people know that they can feel safe talking to us, that we're interested in them, that we care about them, that as a gay person, that I'm here, that I'm ready to listen to them, and not just either volunteering or just letting people know that they can feel safe. If you have suggestions about how lawyers can reach out to the Worcester community.
I find that most of the law firms in Providence have that kind of built into their environment there, where they do provide some pro bono services. There are, the piece of finding services that are friendly to the LGBT community, whether it is attorneys or general practitioners and things like that. That's always a constant ask that's out there, and there's always a constant need of whether it's a dentist, an attorney, like what the list goes on. And so there have been efforts in the past to kind of put some of these directories together. There is a digital listserv that exists in Providence that's just kind of like a community forum where people can share resources and ideas. So someone will just pose a question. I was like, hey, I've got this issue. Does anyone have an attorney that can help me out with that, whether it be pro bono or not? Because sometimes it's not necessarily about the pro bono part. It's more about having someone that understands you and understands the community. So I feel like that's always a constant need out there. And I'd say the biggest ask that I always kind of get out there is for general practitioners, finding someone that is basically can serve the needs of our community. So the same thing goes with attorneys too. So that doesn't completely answer your question, but
I think that's where I was going a little bit, and
yeah,
just a long-winded ramble.
Yeah.
I would just say locally there's a number of community-based organizations that work with the LGBT community that I'm sure would be very anxious to have talented attorneys who are willing to kind of connect with some of their clients.
Good looking too.
We're having
right?
hands raised right now. I think specifically about Pastor Judy Hanlon at the Hadwin Park Community Church that works with LGBTQ asylum seekers. If there was a group of folks who needed legal help, it's asylum seekers in general and this particular community in particular, given what's going on nationally. So there's a lot of folks who have very complicated legal cases that I think could really benefit. So I would make that recommendation specifically.
And Jonathan, you had something to say, and then Aaron.
Yes. Emily, first of all, have you been here for a winter yet?
I have many,
Okay, good.
actually.
Okay.
It's the humidity I can't handle.
Interesting.
Give me snow any day.
That's a Texas thing. Okay. I want to mention specifically Community Legal Aid, which is a local nonprofit organization that serves as a clearinghouse in many ways and is constantly looking for lawyers that they can use to support individuals and organizations, particularly in the nonprofit sector and particularly low-income people.
So I wanted to respond to your question with what I think will be a very helpful thought, but you also made me think of something else, and so I'll share both. We've mentioned Jana Torchak a number of times this evening as the director of the Office of Human Rights and Disabilities, and also the liaison at some point in time. She is an attorney, and she knows everyone doing all the work everywhere in the city. So I would encourage you, first I would applaud you for wanting to know how to do more, and then I would encourage you to talk to her because her door is always open. If you want, you have to find it, but once you find it, it's room 101 and she's in there. She knows everyone, and she knows what everyone does, and she's a great resource. She really, really is. And to your point, not to exhaustively explain, but I will tell you that the funding issue is very real, and Community Legal Aid, as a result of that funding restriction, created 5 years ago Central West Justice. And so Central West Justice is free from those restrictions by design, and is able to help in a lot of cases where Central Community Legal Aid could not.
Thank you. Thanks for your question.
Thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. I don't think there was a perfect question to move into my announcement and welcome to the community. I'm Madeline. I work with the Massachusetts LGBT Chamber of Commerce. And we are a group out there that are gathering LGBT-owned and ally-owned businesses on our in our membership. I wrote something down so that I don't ramble. I want to first thank David Connor and the other organizers of this event for creating this space, any space for community and queer community organizing, and is beautiful and an honor to see. In that vein, I wanted to extend a welcome from the Chamber to the Worcester community, to the Worcester business community, and offer our support to any local businesses and business owners who are out there, who are out or want to come out in support of the LGBT community. We strongly believe at the Chamber that there cannot be social justice without economic justice. And we are excited and thrilled to work with anyone who supports our cause, to energize LGBT-owned and ally-owned small businesses, and really put more money in the pockets of LGBT folk. Lastly, a well-deserved shout out to our very first Worcester business member, Queer the Scene. Creators and innovators David and Lamar have been amazing partners already in the community, in organizing beyond their business. And they believe, like us, that economic justice for the queer community is possible if we work together. I'd like to thank David and this space again, and if you would like to receive any information about the Chamber and the really critical, important work we are doing for small business owners, specifically LGBT business owners. There are 22,000 across the state. We want to reach every single one of you and help you grow your business and help grow the LGBT community. Thank you.
I want to take a quick second and just do a pitch on the exhibit. If any of you have seen it already, or you want to go back and visit it, or you've not yet, two of the things that have been mentioned here, one is a list of LGBTQ friendly or ally businesses. That's something that the Gay and Lesbian Coalition of Central Massachusetts started doing in the early 1990s. So these efforts have happened before, right? And then in the early 2000s, there was an organization in Worcester called the Central Mass Business Council that was also interested in creating LGBTQ, almost a gayborhood on Water Street, and LGBTQ identified businesses and allies. So the thing is, these things have happened before, and they haven't been sustainable. And so one of the things we're really interested in tonight as a community is how do we have these initiatives be sustainable. So I applaud you, and I hope that maybe the Worcester Chamber of Commerce and other individuals can be a part of this, because this has been a strategy historically in marginalized communities, not just LGBTQ communities, communities of color, et cetera, for advancement and economic justice. So thank you for coming tonight and being here, and I hope that the city can work with you as well. Do you want to say something?
Yeah. I think that's great, and I'm excited to work with your organization. One thing I would mention, some folks might have read recently, we came out with a disparity study, and it was particularly focused on the construction trades and looking at what parts of our community were underrepresented, women, minority communities. And we put in place the most aggressive diversity goals in Massachusetts. More than Boston, Cambridge, anywhere else, I'm proud to say. And we've created a minority business directory on the city's website any business can sign up for, which allows people who are doing business with the city for purposes of construction. So the people who are going to build the new Doherty High School, the people who are going to get a TIF from the city of Worcester doing a private development but getting a tax break, have to abide by these goals. And we're trying to help them reach those goals by creating this directory so we know who the minority, and we specifically mention LGBTQ businesses as part of that directory. So it's an opportunity to connect LGBTQ businesses with people who now are required, because of these goals, to hire underrepresented groups, including those businesses. So we're trying to make that connection and say, if you want to come build something for the city of Worcester, like a $300 million new Doherty High School, make sure you look at this list and use these folks from this part of our community. So.
Thank you for that.
This is from a parent's perspective, right? So just to follow up what you were talking about in terms of LGBTQ curriculum, and Laura was discussing, coincidentally, on the eve of this conversation, I received this text from my child who attends Worcester Public Schools. And I read this just because I want to give an idea of what I think the climate is and why it's so dire that we do something that's actionable. So it says, so I'm a senior. She's had me in her class for 4 years now. Every year I've brought up how gendering the class is pointless and it makes me and other kids feel very uncomfortable. I've literally cried and had panic attacks in her class and still explained to her with kindness and patience how and why she should change and how they do things. Today she did it again, and I just said, if this keeps happening, I'm not participating in this class. She then blames me for being trans and not patient and tells me to have empathy since she's old. I explained that there are many other trans kids in the school, many of whom are freshmen, and I'm not letting them feel that way since I've felt like this since I've been here. She just huffed and puffed and walked away. So today I have the conversation with the school. I just, to kind of see where they're at on this topic, and I meet with the principal and I meet with the teacher in whose class this happened, and it was very evident to me that it was just really a lack of understanding, and I didn't want to point blame, and I didn't want to point, I wanted to be very constructive on that, and so I said, what is the next step? And there was no next step. So they know that this is a topic. They knew that, and I asked them if they knew about the national conversation. There was kind of like no understanding around that. So it was very concerning, and it just made tonight make a lot of sense, especially for what Corey was talking about. So I just wanted to put that out there as a statement.
So maybe a follow-up to that might be a question to the folks from Worcester here on the panel about the relationship with the schools and how this kind of information, which is school-specific in this instance, and one particular teacher then becomes scaled out to do a kind of awareness check across the public schools in the city, and then expectations, not just awareness, but expectations. What's the expectation of treatment? So I guess it's a similar question, Ed, like the question around hospitals. How do you bring people to the table to share this? And again, that's why this is such a great night, because people are being able to talk to each other and listen to each other and hear lived experiences that otherwise often take place in silos, right? But we're a community and we need to be connected. So you're free to comment if you wish, or.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a few different ways that we could approach this. Certainly the Human Rights Commission, I can do my piece. But I also think that the community needs to reach out to the superintendent, to the school committee, educate them. I look at Laura, we had a couple of years ago, the mayor and I spent a number of hours talking to folks at youth at Safe Homes and hearing their experience and what their real experience was in some school settings with some teachers and stuff. It's powerful. And if you're a human being, you're going to be moved by those stories and the anger, the frustration, the lasting damage that some of those conversations and in many cases ignorance, some cases purposeful, but in some cases just ignorance, not understanding, not appreciating. And so I would just urge the community, and maybe you guys already do this, every candidate for school committee ought to be invited to come and hear from those youth, from their lived experience.
Sometimes, so I'm a college professor at Holy Cross, right? And there's a sort of saying at the college these days, given what's been going on, stop asking students to educate, right? The question around leadership, right? So I guess that's, and you don't have to respond to it, but it's just something to kind of sit with. How do we as leaders in the community not just say, hey, community, come and teach us your situation, but that proactive approach, right? Or the reaching out or the including. So it's a two-way street is what I'm trying to say. But I do think leadership really matters on these issues, many of which are existential. It's people's existence, it's people's lives. So I think it needs to be a little, it's something to think about, the proactive nature. Corey, did you want to say something? And then Ed?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is, an example of something. So you mentioned the hospitals. I think this is an example where, there is a lot more control. These schools are publicly funded and run, unlike the hospitals. So, this is definitely something, and we're here as a free resource to schools that request services. So, maybe we can try to make that happen. I would say we do have schools where we have support from the top, and districts where we have superintendents who, make it a point to implement this, and then, in other places that's not the case. And so I think we're, we as the commission and the program that we run, we are the main provider of LGBTQ training for schools, but we have no authority to implement it. We rely on the schools or the districts to come to us. And I also want to add that I think, to really move beyond, we have laws, we have trans students protected in some respects. We have really clear guidance from the state on that. So anyone, any student is free to identify with the gender that they identify with, and you can use the restroom that you want to use. However, if there's only a boys' room and a girls' room and you don't identify with either one, or you do identify but you don't want to be gendered in that way, we have a lot fewer options. And I think that it's, one thing is just removing kind of the instances of discrimination, and another thing is actually building inclusion, and that's a lot harder and requires a lot more time and dedication.
Honors people. Oh, do you want to say something?
Just
Cohen?
one more thing, that it is mandatory that schools do LGBTQ inclusive inclusion work, but the state law does not say what that is. It can be 1 minute every 5 years at a staff meeting. So we do have some mandatory teeth there, but forcing them to do a good job about it and to do it thoroughly is the challenging part.
Well, so one of the things too that's really important, and I'm just a history geek, so I'm going to go back to history, is Brown versus Board of Education changed the law, right? Pushed back against separate but equal. But of course, it took one of the reasons the modern African American civil rights struggle took place is because there was no enforcement clause. Right, this notion of with due deliberate speed, and one person's deliberate speed and another's are really different paces. And so I think this is where this is around community activism, and as you say, Josh, holding people accountable and showing up. But again, it's a hard thing. It's great to have leadership also show up there as well.
Just wanted to start off thanking you guys for being here and taking the time out of your busy schedules to be part of a conversation in steering the direction of our queer community here in Worcester. I want to start by saying that the conversation about healthcare, I'm taking this thing out, sorry. The conversation about healthcare that Damien had brought up earlier, both of us work for the organization UMass, and I know that you had said, Mr. Augustus, that you have heard the LGBT community brought up at the table a lot during your conversations about where we're going fiscally with the community, with the new business plan, and I think that instead of having these conversations about us at the table, that we should be at the table. And I think, especially when it comes to the healthcare portion, you have two people here who are part of the LGBTQ community who work for the organization UMass, whose true north goal value is to put our patients first, and the LGBTQ population is part of that. And I think working together is definitely something that we can do, not speaking as part of the organization, but as someone who is a patient there and who works there and who is a resident of the city. Beyond that, a bunch of us leaders here in the queer community of Worcester got together talking about some challenges we have faced and some really big strengths that we have here in the city. And we came together and we put together a letter for you. So I'll give that to you, but I wanted to read it real quick to you guys. To the City of Worcester leadership, this letter from the below mentioned parties is to inform the City of Worcester that we intend to form a coalition to represent and advocate for the queer community in Worcester. This letter comes following a Worcester Queer Leadership Summit held in September 2019, where advocates, organization leadership met to discuss issues and opportunities related to the needs of the queer community across topics related to racial, cultural, and economic bias, mental and physical health, civic participation, access to information, and awareness regarding events, activities, programs, and resources available in the city. It is the goal of this, I'll speak loud. It is the goal of this coalition to represent the queer community in Worcester. Actionable steps forward. We believe it is in the best interest of both our community and the city of Worcester to prioritize these issues and recognize the need for support, visibility, and representation for queer people in Worcester in order to realize a vision for the city that is diverse, inclusive, equitable, sustainable, and prosperous. As a first request to the city and to begin solidifying a productive relationship, this group would like to request that 1, the city work with our coalition to identify an acceptable city liaison for the LGBTQIA+ community. 2, with the support and contributions of the coalition, the city established a webpage on the city website dedicated to resources and information for the LGBTQIA+ community that is overseen by the coalition and the city liaison. The city invite a representative from the coalition to regularly participate on committees, commissions, and forums that impact the LGBTQIA+ community. Thank you for your consideration of our request, and we look forward to opening a dialogue, discussing paths forward, and taking actionable steps to elevate our community and the city of Worcester as a whole.
Thank you.
My name is Eric, and I'm a 10th grader in Blackstone Academy. Yeah. My question is, it's not like anything with numbers or like statistics or anything. It's just, what do you think about discrimination? Why do you think it happens?
So, what do you think about discrimination and why do you think it happens? Getting right to the core of it. Thank you for that question. Does anybody approach that question? Aaron?
Number one, I want to say I'm really impressed that you're here, and thank you for being here. What I think the answer is, in part, not entirely, but is fear and lack of understanding, education, and whatever community we're talking about, when we make it us, as long as you're like me in every way, or the ways that I think are important, and them, whatever that means, I think we're always going to find ourselves with someone being discriminated against, someone's rights not being maintained, rather than thinking of us as us, meaning you, me, everyone. And so that's not a very technical or official, but that's my belief, and part of why I serve on the Human Rights Commission, because I want to be more educated. I'm not as educated as I'd like to be around the various communities that we serve, but I do. I believe that you and I and everyone in this room and everyone in the city of Worcester, we're all human. We're all human beings, and there should be no fear, and there should be a greater desire to educate and understand.
Okay, so Professor would say it's about power. And people wanting to keep power that they have, and Martin Luther King said, "No one cedes power willingly," and so I think that it is about fear and it is about ignorance, but ultimately it can often be about power and self-interest, and so that's where taking power and being activist, just like you being here tonight, is a step toward that. Anybody else have? I do want to point out, yesterday I was meeting with the social science liaison, Colleen Kelly, from the Worcester Public Schools, because one of the things the curation team is hoping to do is to get some of this great research about Worcester LGBTQ history into classrooms, right? So we're going to be working, moving forward, around identifying some middle school classrooms for U.S. history, looking at the frameworks and how we can connect with some of these issues and telling Worcester's story. So about structural racism, taking some of this stuff feels so abstract, but if you bring it down to the local, it's real and people actually make change. And then also, just so that you know, in the new frameworks, there's an entire section in the U.S. history section that's LGBTQ history. That's Stonewall, that's Goodridge decision, Obergefell, so it's in there. it's in there as part of the frameworks that our teachers are supposed to be teaching. So I appreciate your comment, and I think this might speak to some of Alexis's point about that slow build and bringing people to the table to contribute to these conversations, and also to, as you said, Corey, actually enact what the frameworks say to do.
I have less of a question and more of just stating my opinion, per se. You know, I've heard the use of intentional a lot, especially from the panel, intentionally not including LGBTQ in the cultural plan as a word, as a language. You should also understand that LGBTQ is not one singular thing. It's an intersectionality of identities. So you should mention it. You should mention it because Black, Latinos, women, boys, girls, everyone is involved in LGBTQ. It's not a single identity. People who are in that identity also have multiple other things coming with it. So I think it should be an intentional way of suggesting that in any cultural plan that you have. Also, I wanted intentional change to how you see queer movement. Queer movement is no longer looking for acceptance or tolerance. We're looking for equal place in everything. And when we come to you and have a conversation, we don't want to think we're trying to have you accept us or tolerate our conversation, but we're in this space as an equal entity, and that's it, period. Respect that, and that's what I see that other leadership are not seeing, that acceptance and tolerance is no longer good enough. We don't want just a rainbow flag. We want to queer the dollars. We want queer education. We want to queer the system. We want to queer the scene. We want to queer the vote. So that's
And you know, I think that that leads perfectly into a question that I know that the city manager can help us with, but if anybody else wants to make a comment, and again, I want to honor people's time, and I want to give Bill Wallace, Executive Director of the Museum, a chance to say a few words. But Ed, what really is the process by which people in this room can introduce their concerns and get a place at the table? Because I think that's also something that mystifies people. We know there's good concerns, there's lots of energy, there's lots of passion, there's lived experiences that can really help to make us a more just and thriving community. But what are the sort of proper next steps? I mean, who should people contact? Where's the transparency around bringing people to the table so it's not just diversity, but it's really inclusion from the start? Can you help us explain that kind of the system or the protocols?
Yeah, and I want to make sure people don't, I'm not the gatekeeper to the table. I'm not the only table that decisions get made at.
So what are some of the tables that we need to know
Well,
about?
I think there are tables at UMass, there are tables at Holy Cross, there are tables at the Worcester Historic Museum, there are tables all across the city where decisions are made about where budgets are allocated, what programming gets done, what the priorities are. Certainly there's a table in City Hall, and people can contact me directly. People can work through any of the different offices depending on the nature of the question, whether it's an issue for the police department, it's an issue for the health department, it's an issue for the school department, whatever it may be. And certainly my door is always open. I'll put this out, we are constantly looking, we are desperately looking for people to serve on boards and commissions. There are people in this room I've personally invited to serve on boards and commissions. I see some of them who are serving on boards and commissions. You have your invitation, the door is open. Parks Commission, Planning Board, you know, you name your interest, and there is a role, an opportunity for you to be at the table, be at the decision-making table. So that's one of the cool things about city government. The bar is relatively low. If you express an interest, you go through the process, there is a seat for you to help make these decisions together with us. Board of Health. There are a number of places where very important, very tangible decisions get made, and those seats are reserved for the community. And so I would urge people to take advantage and take your seat at that table and help us make the best, most inclusive decisions possible.
Great, thank you so much, Ed. So I think I'll turn it over to Bill Wallace. Before I do that, I want to say thank you to each of you for being here tonight. This is a really exciting kind of first time program, and I think it would be wonderful if we could come back in a year, because the LGBTQ Worcester for the Record project is an ongoing project. It's certainly grant grant funded for the next year and a half, generosity by Mass Humanities, and also the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and Scholarship in Action at Holy Cross. So we still have a good 18 months worth of work that we're doing, and it could be interesting to come back at the end of that time and sort of see where we stand and see what the next steps would be. So thank all of you for being here. Thank the panelists so much for your time on this wet fall evening, and I want to turn over to Bill Wallace, Executive Director of the museum.
On behalf of the museum, I want to add our thanks as an organization to all of you, not just our panelists and Stephanie, but all of you for, in fact, coming to the table this evening. This is the moment that a history museum lives for. That we're not doing this exhibit to tell a bunch of dead old facts about people we don't even know, we've forgotten about. But what does this story tell us about today, tomorrow, and our future? And Stephanie's talking about 18 years, I don't know, 18 months or whatever it was. I don't know where she's going to be in 19 months because this is going to be going on for like 18 years, and it's going to go on for as long as there is a Worcester. So you are all part of that beginning story, and it's really important that you were here this evening, so I want to thank you. If you haven't seen the exhibit, please come back to see it. And I want to remind you of that label that David read the beginnings of earlier. LGBTQ plus Worcester, for the record, highlights some of the ways that the community has worked over the decades to transform the city and county from a largely closeted and conservative space to a more welcoming and just home. The past. But it also ends, thanks to our historians and our academics, Stephanie and Joe Cullen, who's in the back, and Bob Tobin, who's not able to be here, and our museum staff. It also says their efforts challenge each of us to do more. And that's what tonight is about. That's what a living exhibit is about, and that's why we're grateful to Berkshire Bank for saying we welcome everyone's ideas, your ideas tonight, and Mass Humanities for a commonwealth of ideas. We are a commonwealth, and we are the future of Worcester's past. So, Aaron said earlier, why wouldn't we talk about it? So let's not stop talking about it. We were asked that question here at the museum when we said we were going to do an LGBTQ exhibit, and somebody said, well, why? And we said, well, why wouldn't we? This is Worcester history, and it's part of it. It's part of its today, and it's part of its tomorrow. So the label also says, what choices and actions would each of us commit to? And I think that's the challenge that we leave here with tonight. Whether we come back to this place to talk about it at this table, or we come back to a city hall table, or we come back to a Greater Worcester table, or a cultural coalition meeting, whatever the table, it is what action are we committed to? Because clearly there is more to the story. We need to continue writing that story. And some of us will be dead or retired, but the next generation of historians will be continuing the story in a few years. But in the meantime, come see the exhibit. Come to the Worcester Historical Museum. This is our story, whether it's LGBTQ, it's French, Canadian, it's Greek, it's Jewish, whatever it is. This is our family table. The Worcester Historical Museum is the story of us. So the exhibit is here Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. Come see it. And in the meantime, join me in thanking our sponsors, who are the Mass Humanities. Thank you, Jennifer, for coming tonight. College of the Holy Cross, the Rice Charitable Foundation, Unibank, the Massachusetts Commission on Youth. I can't read that without my glasses, sorry. On LGBTQ youth. I should know that by now, don't you think? The Mass Cultural Council, Berkshire Bank, and everyone who is joining us in this effort. It is teamwork, and you are all part of the team, and we thank our panelists one more time for leading us.